So here's a question I would ask you, something I've kicked around for a number of years now. And I'm now hearing this phrase. Alex Jones just used my phrase, breakaway civilization, just the other day. Richard Hoagland kind of tried to take it as his own for a little while, and I think he's backed away. But here's an idea. So what happens when, let's say we are all part of a secret research team. We're a black budget team, and we're studying Roswell technology, or maybe the Aztec UFO crash, or some other thing. And everyone here's got like a genius IQ, and we got a lot of money and lots of time to work on this project, many, many years, and total secrecy within which to do it. So maybe after a while we might have a couple of eureka moments where we can have great ideas, maybe ways of improving fiber optics or integrated circuits or solid-state electronics, you know, money makers. So that would be great for us and for everyone who's paying for us, because you're inventing the future. You've got it right there. And suddenly the incentive for giving this secret up goes down to less than zero. But what happens if you have other breakthroughs that are even better than this? Just let's play a little what if here. So what if someone discovers the proper source of energy for some of these objects, and it's not petroleum? So what if someone discovers some version of free energy, or masters electrogravitics, right? So I would think that at that point, our bosses, the guys who pay our paychecks, would say, okay, that's very good. That's not going anywhere, but we'll keep working on it. Because clearly that type of a breakthrough would be truly revolutionary and would threaten the world's largest industry, petroleum, and would threaten the entire infrastructure of the world, which is based upon petroleum. Jobs and all of these subsidiary industries which rely on it. I mean, going off of petroleum, I liken it to operating on a human being, and your job as a surgeon is to completely give them a new, a circulation system, let's say. So you have to take out all the veins and arteries and capillaries, and you're going to put in a new system, but you can't kill them in the process. Because really our whole infrastructure, everything is dependent on this. And getting off of it, even under the easiest circumstances, is never going to be easy. So I think what would happen is we would continue working on this wicked, awesome, cool technology, and we'd develop our own flying saucers. Why wouldn't we? At some point, I think electrogravitics has been mastered. That's my own opinion. And if that's the case, then it really gets crazy, because we could build our own craft, but we wouldn't be able to share, we wouldn't be able to let the rest of the world know we have the craft. Because if we do that, then boom, there goes everything. So what would we use the craft for? Well, my guess is we would probably use them under highly classified conditions, and those conditions would be to deal with these other beings. That's what I think. And you could use it to explore. You go around the solar system, which in fact are what a number of fairly credible, believe it or not, leaks have indicated. And before you know it, we would almost be like a totally separate society. I mean, what is it that makes a civilization unique anyway? It's hard to quantify, but I think certainly level of technology is one thing that distinguishes a civilization. Another would be its worldview or its cosmology. In both of those cases, we'd be totally different from our friends and family outside of our community. We might have a totally different manner of social interaction. We would certainly see ourselves as very different. In a sense, you could say, arguably, that we would be a separate civilization, one that is broken away from the other one, hence a breakaway civilization. Next slide. And that's really the basic idea. And I don't know how far they've gone with this. I don't know how advanced their technology is. I will tell you, I had a very interesting conversation a number of years ago with a former scientist with NSA. He was a private contractor, a private employee of the NSA, not military. Extremely brilliant, and said to me that circa 1964-65, the NSA had computers with clock speeds of 650 megahertz. And today we would laugh at that. But of course, in 1965, no one had personal computers. And the computing world did not achieve that clock speed in the consumer market until around the year 2000, 35 years later. 35 years. So the NSA, you could say, was 35 years ahead of the rest of the world on that metric in computer technology. That's not too shabby. And I've remembered saying to him, too, well, holy smokes. I mean, I remember watching the movie Apollo 13, and remember when they were stuck out in space and all these guys using slide rules to get them back. And I said, I'd be kind of annoyed if I were one of those astronauts. And he said, well, look, I understand that, but you have to realize that computer was way more important than even the lives of the astronauts. We could not share that. It was way too sensitive. And that was their attitude. And the other thing about NSA is that it wasn't really publicly known to exist until 1964. That was the first book. The first book that ever appeared that talked about the NSA was called Invisible Government by David Wise and Thomas Ross. It came out that year, 64. So here's the thing. The NSA was a secret organization that had probably the best computer in the world in the early 60s. That's something to ponder. Anyway, so back onto a breakaway civilization. My basic concept of it is that it's almost like an invisible empire. Better technology than you and me, able, because of what they have, to explore areas of our world unavailable to the rest of us. I'm thinking Earth orbit and beyond. Is there a base on the far side of the moon? Crazy as it sounds, could be. There's some very good, interesting leaks that have indicated as such. And if that's the case, then clearly they've got something much, much better than what the rest of us know about. Possible interactions or encounters with non-human intelligences? I would think so. Certainly deeper science and cosmology, and off the grid in many, many, many ways. Doesn't mean that they all necessarily live on Mars in an alternative 3 scenario, by the way. I mean, I've always felt the action is on Earth. They're probably here. They have family. I can imagine that they're here, but that type of society, I should think, is probably very stressful, I would think, in a lot of ways. Next slide, please. Now, if you think that the whole idea of a breakaway civilization is a little too out there for you, okay, fair enough. But forgetting UFOs, forgetting all the crazy conspiracy things that I like to talk about much of the time, just on a purely prosaic matter, I would think that everyone in this room is probably past the 6th grade civics class version of government in which we're told, here's how it works. Okay, I elect my member of Congress, and then we elect the president, and we have checks and balances. And if you don't like your guy, you throw the bumps out and get a new one. And that's how it works. So that's really, of course, not how it works. So who's in control? Is it the president, or, next, please, or the guy who puts him into the White House? That's David Rockefeller, who I believe is 138 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, I think once a week he gets the blood of a young child to keep young, which is always a good thing. No, I don't know. He might be 90. I think David Rockefeller is 96, if I'm not mistaken. And he's probably no longer, but it is absolutely true that he was directly responsible for a number of these people becoming president. Jimmy Carter famously. David Rockefeller, when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, he tried to sound like what Ron Paul, basically, and he campaigned against the Trilateral Commission, the insiders, and all that. Of course, what happened was Bill Casey was his campaign manager, who was a Rockefeller man right from the get-go. And then, of course, when Reagan was campaigning in the primaries, he didn't just single out Jimmy Carter, he singled out George Bush. He said, I'm not like those insiders. And he said, George Bush will never be on my administration. And then, of course, when he has Bush as his running mate, famously, a couple of longtime Reagan supporters walked right off the stage at the Republican convention. So Reagan signed on. And in fact, he had a very nice meeting with David Rockefeller. I think it was in September 1980 when he was still a candidate. Anyway, I think it's Rockefeller, and then, Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, who are his guys. And I think the word was always, one of them runs the Republican Party, the other runs the Democrat Party, which I think was probably true for a long time, and who knows if it's still true, or now their successors. Point is, it's money. It's always been money. We all know it. That's really running the show. And what does a president do? How much can a president really rule? A president has to kiss babies. He's got to shake the hands. He's got to get on TV. How many black budget programs is he really going to know about or run? Probably none. Next slide. And, you know, unless you think that this is not accurate, I would encourage you to read this book, John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he talks about how powerful private financial groups make it their business to rob entire nations of their treasury through fraud. It's a very interesting book. He knows about it because he used to do it. Next slide. Oh, yes, right. I was talking about black budgets earlier and how very few studies have been done on them, and that's really true. And you'd think on something as important as black budgets, we really need to shed more light. But of course, the problem is that's why they're called black budgets, because you can't see anything. There's only been a couple of public studies of the black budget. One was done over a decade ago by Bill Sweetman, who wasn't an economist. He's an aviation aerospace guy. Doesn't write about UFOs, but I'm sure I'd love to talk with him about them. I'm sure he has some opinions. He did some research on black budget, special access programs back at the very end of the Clinton years. And his estimate is that there were about 150 of them. That seems low, but his basic assessment was that there didn't seem to be a whole lot of oversight. Many were unacknowledged. That is, you know, they weren't supposed to exist, but they did. He noted that they had separate, almost independent classification systems. So in other words, a project manager of one black budget program would basically create his or her own classification system, dominated by private contractors, and he had no idea how they got all their money. It was opaque to him. A couple of years ago, of course, in the Washington Post, Dana Priest and Bill Arkin did their series called Top Secret America, which for a mainstream, you know, corporate media type of publication was pretty good. They came to the same type of conclusion. They said, we cannot tell how large and unwieldy and expensive the United States intelligence community is. It is almost impossible to get a true handle on it, except it is out of control. It's massively privatized, which is what Sweetman had said. We don't even know if it's making the country safer. Their implication is that it probably wasn't. Next slide.